Yeah.
Yeah, so there's another version of Queen e7. If black plays h6, which is just a logical move. You know, we saw bishop g5 was happening often. Black prevents it in the future. White plays h3, again, a useful move, stopping bishop g4 and knight g4. And if queen e7 here, so I actually, for some reason, played queen e2 in another game I had against Tomaszewski.
For some reason.
I'm not sure why. It was a rapid game, and maybe
Yeah.
maybe I just didn't want to play bishop d5 at the time.
But it's a very central idea one should remember. Once the queen leaves, gives up control over d5, you go there with the bishop.
Here it's good again.
Yeah.
Similar ideas. If bishop a7, then queen d3, or if rook d8 here, queen d3. And the same ideas, queen c4. Slightly different version, but no worse than the other one. White still has pressure. The only difference is that here we don't play with bishop g5, obviously. We're more likely to play queen c4 and to trade bishops with bishop e3 and try to take advantage of the c5 square. The move I played was fine, queen e2. And it was still, I think, an instructive game because my opponent played very logically but ran into trouble, very serious trouble.
That's a good sign.
Yeah, he played bishop e6.
Yeah, okay.
I played bishop c4, attacking this. And if he takes, I'm quite happy to get queen c4 and knight b3. You can see that these pieces are awkwardly placed. Instead, he played knight d4. Trading knights, so a typical idea, because we haven't played c3, he's happy to get rid of his knight. But I played knight b3, and now he has trouble with his bishop. The problem is that he can't really drop back to a7 because I'll take on a6. And if he takes on c4, queen c4, my queen's very active. Important to note that after bishop a7 you can't take on a6 because there's bishop takes f2, winning the queen. A little tactic. But we have moves like bishop d2, for example, attacking b4. And it's difficult for black to defend this, very awkward. Or bishop e3 is also a fine move because after take, yeah, it's simplified.
Oh, the queen on c4 is
On the other hand, the queen on c4 is actually really good, and black's pawns are all weak. Now, like, it's become clear that this inclusion of a4, b4, and a5 has weakened all of black's pawns.
Yeah. Great.
So that's why he played rook d8, to try to maintain the bishop on d4. After knight d4, the problem was that rook d4, I can take on a6. And tactically this is working out for white. And that's why he was counting on bishop c4, and his hope was queen c4, rook d4. He starts attacking all my stuff with tempo.
One thing that was different when you mentioned rook d4,
bishop a6,
rook e4, you just play bishop e3 and you're happy.
This is completely, it's more than fine because black won a pawn. No, of course, important. But the rook on e4 is kind of just stuck there. Bishop b7 is happening, or bishop d3, and how past a pawn. That's another thing. Once you put the pawn on a5, if black ever loses this a6 pawn, our pawn is really close to promotion. If we were given one more move, bishop b7, black can just resign. And if black has to stop it with like bishop d5, bishop d3, the rook has to go to some miserable h4 square, and even if we just keep pushing our pawn, the pawn will win the game. That's why he played bishop c4. So queen c4, rook d4 was his hope, but I hit him with a little Zhuxinzuk again, knight f5. Rather than worry about my queen hanging, I noticed that after the trade of queens, I have to move knight c6, and he doesn't lose a piece, but after rook d6 I can decide which pawn I want to take. And I'm actually not sure which is better. Both are winning. This one might be perfectly good. White is up a pawn for nothing.
Can you try rook d1 instead? I mean, it looks funny, but after before right away. I mean,
sorry. Of course, yeah, rook d1.
Just
yeah, you can play this.
Doesn't look right, but
so
maybe
I'm thinking that after rook d1, bishop d1, I can play bishop d2.
Everything's hanging. Yeah.
Take.
Yeah.
Bishop b4. The king should move somewhere. I guess g8. And if I just play a simple move f3, yeah, you're not down material, but what are you doing with the e-pawn?
Not yet. I mean,
I think you're losing material very soon.
Yeah.
For example, you defend the pawn, play rook c1, an awkward bishop, it goes back somewhere, knight e7, pick up the pawn with a winning position.
Yeah.
Although I'm sure that there's more than one good way to play this position. I also noticed the tactic bishop h6, but after bishop d2, I'm not sure it's worth the tempo to take this pawn. I would say, yeah, this bishop d2 is very strong. So that's why he played queen e6, defending both queen and bishop. But after queen f3, he was in a rather awkward situation. Rather than having the queen on e6 and bishop on c4, he would rather have queen
on
d7,
c4.
or yeah, and bishop on e6.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or if the bishop were
Yeah.
on like g6 or c6, it would be a whole other story. The bishop on c4 is doing nothing and is just going to get kicked around. On top of that, bishop h6 is a direct threat.
Queen g3,
Queen g3 and with the attack coming. So king h7 he played to stop queen g3 and bishop h6. b3, chase the bishop back, queen g3, attacking this pawn, so he defended it, defending against the mate threat. Queen h4, again you see how every move has a threat. Now the threat is bishop h6. If you were to make some blunder like bishop c6, take, and mate. That's why he played knight e8. Again, he's making awkward moves just to try to
survive. Yeah,
just to stop my threats, which are never, again, bishop d2. So attacking b4, and if c5, you know, I continue attacking bishop e3. And what do you do with this pawn? If you play, you could play rook c8, I guess. And probably here just rook d1 is a simple way of playing. Knight e7 would win material. Rook d1, and yeah, black is not losing, I guess, on the spot. But you can't move. If you move your knight, rook d6 comes. If you move your bishop, bishop c5.
Also, queen e7 might be a move. I don't know.
Also, and maybe even here, why consider queen e7?
Just want to work with this fork.
Because if he takes, now we do have the fork.
Yeah. But it's
in any case, a very bad position. He decided to play knight d6. His hope was bishop b4, knight takes f5, regains the pawn, or knight d6, queen d6, protects b4. But I had queen e7. And after knight takes f5, I take. It looks like black might be out of the woods, but suddenly everything is hanging. You take on f5, I take on e5, and I'm still attacking all your pawns. You defend, let's say, this one. I take this one, and I'm up a pawn with a winning endgame. If instead you go here, I take with a knight, the rook goes somewhere, like e8, I go knight d5, and suddenly I'm attacking everything again, and I win a pawn.
Queen e7 is a remarkable move in this position, I think. One would maybe think that white is so active with a queen, especially with a knight on f5, that you want to go for an attack. But all of a sudden, after queen e7, you go for an endgame because black has so many weaknesses.
I mean, the position is concrete.
Yeah.
And, yeah, we're trying to attack him, but we're also trying to play on the queen side, because he has weaknesses. And to us, it doesn't matter if we win by mate or we win just because we're up a pawn in endgame. The result is the same. So, so rather than chasing after an attack which may or may not work, we're happy to trade queens and win in pawn up endgame. And that's what happened. We traded like this. I took on b4. Traded knights. Maybe his hope was that with opposite colored bishops he would have drawing chances. But this game didn't last very long. Despite the opposite colored bishops, we have all the rooks on the board. If black could trade off all the rooks, then yeah, it's a draw. But with all the rooks on the board, this is very far from a draw, and in fact it's just losing. He stopped rook d5, but I played rook d3. Threats of rook c3. Rook b8, I didn't even move the bishop, I played rook c3 because the rook ending here is winning. He moved his bishop, bishop a3, c7 is hanging, and we traded pawns, but it didn't help black's position. His pawns are still weak, and I followed it up with an attack on the king. Rook e3.
After all, yeah.
Rook g3, and here he soon resigned. Yeah, so that was a game. I think an instructive game, although I should remind viewers that in general after queen e7, although queen e2 is a fine move, bishop d5 is still my recommendation. But it's good to remember the ideas that we see in these games. Yeah, so black, we saw bishop, we saw knight g4, we saw bishop b7, we saw queen e7. Black can also develop the queen to d6. And he can do this again with the inclusion of h6, h3, or without.
Mm.
In both cases, we play the same way. Queen e2. He plays bishop e6. Again, bishop g4 with threat of knight d4, just c3. We cover the square. So more often than not, black develops with bishop e6. Now the downside of having the queen on d6 is knight c4. We attack the queen, and he's not happy to give up the bishop pair. Again, after take, we see the weakness of a6. It keeps coming back. It might not have been so important at the start, but it keeps occurring for black.
1 second, maybe. And in this position, if I go, say as black, I go knight d4, and I try to get dark squared control, claiming that I get a lovely bishop on d4.
That's a valid argument. That white has a bishop pair, but black has a bishop on d4, which is rather powerful. Thing is, I don't believe that you'll be able to prevent me from playing c3 at some point. So the question is how exactly I achieve it. Maybe I could play queen d3 with the idea of c3. But also I have, for example, maybe rook d1 as an idea. Here for me the only question is if the tactics work out for white, which they probably do. Let's see if we can find an even more accurate way of playing.
I mean, once whites get in c3, I think black is busted.
Yeah, once white gets c3, it's going to be very bad for black.
Yeah.
The only thing is that tactically it might be a little bit challenging to get it. For example, after rook d1, now I'm threatening c3, but I was wondering a bit about stuff like knight takes e4, winning a pawn, queen e4, bishop f2, king f2, queen d1, which, now black has a material balance which should favor us, but this pin is a bit annoying. On the other hand, maybe it's not that annoying after, for example, bishop e2. We end up with two bishops in an open position. But also here, actually, I think that maybe, rather than automatically recapture, maybe the best move is queen d3. I just realized that this is an option. Because if you take now queen f3, and for example, bishop d4, suddenly c3.
That's a much better version, of course.
My queen on f3 covers. And next move I want to play c3 anyway. So maybe this is the most accurate option for white. Again, every position is a bit different, and in general, white is almost always better when we have the bishop pair, but you'll need to find the best concrete option in each individual position. Most players play queen e7 here. So he lost the tempo, but he can argue that the bishop on e6, at least he prevented our setup with bishop on c4 and knight on b3. This is a bit of a worse setup for white than the other one. Now we develop with bishop e3. In general, he doesn't really want to take. There's no reason right now for black to go for this. And also, in some cases, we can even consider knight e3, because the pawn on e4 is usually invulnerable. For example, here after knight e4, knight e5, take, we again see this fork. So here black has played either rook b8 or rook d8, and we'll see this also with the pawn on h6 and h3. In general, it's better to play rook b8 for black, which is a bit surprising, because if you play rook d8, here I take, queen c5, and knight d2, and this is a very strong move. Basically, I'm just attacking a6, and that's the main thing. Again, we see this weakness, and if you take on b3, knight takes. Now, to defend the pawn, you either have to go to a very horrible square like a7, or you have to go to b5, and then I'm left with a passed a pawn. Now we see again. Here white can play knight c5, a6. The passed a pawn is really dangerous, especially here. So the tactical reason for rook b8 is that after bishop c5, queen c5, knight d2, same idea. Black plays bishop b3, knight b3, and queen b5, which is kind of a deep point. And now after queen takes b5, black is not forced to give us a passed a pawn, but instead equalizes, because the a5 pawn, now we're tied down to it. We're not worse by any means here, and we can still play his position knight d2, knight c4, but it's about equal. That's why after bishop takes b3, I'm suggesting an interesting move, c takes b3.
A bit like in the Rui Lopez open line. I
That's
remember
correct,
that now, yeah. C takes b3, opening the c file.
It's a very different position, but it's the same idea.
Yeah.
The idea is that we're using the c file, right? If we're giving one more move to play rook c1, we're going to be winning the pawn on a6 and winning the game. That's why black is completely forced to play knight takes a5. After knight a5, we play rook ec1. And if queen b5, for example, we take, rook c7, with a better endgame. Not a winning endgame by any means, but it's equal material. But the knight on a5 is just very bad. It can't move anywhere. If it moves at any point, you're going to lose the a6 pawn. So you're totally tied down, and my rook on c7 is very active, and I have a better position. That's why after rook ec1, maybe it's better for black to go queen b6. But here I take on e5, and we traded pawns. We traded the a pawn for the e pawn. And I would argue that the e pawn is a more useful pawn now for white. I mean, we have the kingside majority. Black has a queenside majority, but what's he doing with his queenside majority? He still can't move his knight because a6 is hanging. The c pawn is backwards on the open c file, and we have squares for our knights, c4, and we have the open a file. White is not much better, but has a certain advantage here.
May I award, this is one of the special moves again. Knight c to d2, back. I mean, we just arrived on c4, and now you just go back.
In both versions. With the rook on d8, it's even stronger.
So, yeah, let's give this one. Exclamation mark. Hitting a6.
Yeah,
okay.
that's our main idea after bishop e3.
Okay.
Is to take and to play knight cd2. It's maybe a bit counterintuitive to help black develop the queen of c5, but we need to put pressure on a6. That's the main point in this position. And trading pieces, sometimes it helps black, of course, because you ease the congestion in your position. But sometimes it helps white because suddenly all these squares which were defended by black's pieces, for example, in this position we see especially, the dark square bishop used to defend c5. Now it's a weakness. The light square bishop used to defend c4. Now it's a weakness. And for example, after queen a7, queen c4, we start to invade. We start to take advantage of all these weak squares. And so that is queen d6. Queen d6 has the advantage of it doesn't allow bishop d5. The downside is it allows knight c4 with tempo. There is a very interesting, very unusual move, bishop e6 here, which was played by Rustam Kazimjanov against...
you happen to know quite well, I guess.
He played it at the time against Negi, Parimarjan Negi, in the Olympiad in 2014. I think that was the first time it had been played. It's a very concrete idea. Black ruins his structure. Like, positionally, like all these pawns, he's just completely busted. And he does it for only concrete reasons. Now he has the f-file, and the bishop on c5, and he will play knight g4 next move, and combine that, the threats to f2 with knight d4, opening the f-file for his rook. It's a very dangerous approach, but it doesn't work out for black, unfortunately. We play queen e2. Now, if white is given one move, for example, if black played queen d7, and we play c3, he's going to be left with a horrible, ruined structure. He needs to have the d4 square for his knight. Queen e2 also introduces the threat of queen c4, attacking this, and potentially this. So black has to act fast. Again, if he plays knight d4, we take, let's say he takes, and then
f3,
knight f3, and yeah, because he didn't create threats fast enough, he's left just with a miserable position. That's why black played knight g4 in the high-level game, Wesley So against Levon Aronian. Knight g4, attacking f2, forces rook f1. Now, if we're given a chance to play, for example, in this position, h3, or knight b3, or directly queen c4 as a threat, any move basically will cut into black's plans, which is why in the game, Aronian struck fast. Bishop f2, rook f2. Now this position is simply busted for black. But he played knight d4, which is very awkward, yeah? Because if knight d4, here there's stuff like rook takes f2.
Queen g and then you
queen
take
d4.
on d4.
With a lot of threats. So I'm wondering if that's the best way for black, but I think it is. Because knight f2 runs into knight f3, or actually knight e6 stuff. So Wesley played queen c4, and knight f2 happened, king f2, queen h4, check, king g1, queen g4, and this position is a bit of a mess and led to a draw eventually. Instead of that, Wesley had a very strong move, queen d3. Knight f2, king f2. If knight f3, white plays knight f3, and the two pieces, all other things being equal, the two pieces are winning here. And queen h4, king g1, and the queen on d3 is just better than on c4. It's actually a bit of a surprise that he didn't go for this. And here white is borderline winning. For example, if he plays queen g4, as he played in the game, now I can just take e d4, knight f3, or queen d1, knight f1, and in both cases, black ends up with a losing position. And the queen is hanging, so really black has no better moves. So queen d3 was actually a winning move. Kind of surprising that he let this chance, this opportunity slip. It's better for black after rook f1 to go knight d4. With the funny point, knight takes d4, rook takes f2.
Oh dear.
It looks crazy, everything's hanging. But after rook f2, queen d4, white can't adequately cover this rook, and black regains all the material, ends up up a pawn. So after knight d4, we have the strong move queen c4. And again, knight f3 is leading nowhere for black because e6 and c5 are hanging. And for example, queen d6, it's just not good for black after h3. If you're forced to retreat your knight, you're just left with a miserable structure. And after queen d6 as well, h3, we have the same position. Knight f3, knight f3. So again, as I said, knight f6 will play bishop g5, for example, and black is left with a miserable structure. And if he takes on f2, similar to what Aronian did, rook f2, again, taking on f2, king f2 is good.
Queen can go back.
Queen d1, it's very important that we go back to the queen.
Okay.
Queen takes c2, and here we're a bit pinned, but we have this move queen e1, the idea of bishop e3. Black takes, and ends up with 3 pawns for the bishop and knight. 3 pawns and a rook for the bishop and knight. But these pawns are really weak. I mean, it's indifferent. It would be very different if black had like the e5 pawn and d5. But here he has double d pawns, and after bishop e3, white is actually significantly better. We'll play rook e1, bishop c5. Our 2 pieces are much better than the rook, and we will slowly pick up at least one of these pawns in the near future. So bishop e6, an interesting move.
It looked very scary. I mean,
it looks very scary, but if white knows his stuff, not at all a problem for us. And after a5, that's why most people play h6. h3. I think I mentioned this inclusion, and we saw the move queen e7 here, and white still has bishop d5. And the main move is queen d6. Of course, in a position like this, bishop e6 moves
doesn't make sense.
Don't make any sense. Take, and for example, c3 or queen e2. Probably queen e2 is even better. Black has no knight g4. Queen d6 is the main move. Queen e2. So we had this position with the pawns on h2 and h7, and it doesn't actually change a whole lot. In both cases, black should play bishop e6. If he gives us a move to play like rook d8, knight c4, queen e7, c3, bishop e6, and here we're a bit pinned, but we just play bishop c2, and he's left with this knight on e6, knight on c6, which is just misplaced, and the bishop, moving the bishop to c2 broke the pin and renewed the threat of e5. So he's kind of a bit congested, you know. You can play knight d7, but I can play knight e3 with ideas of knight d5 and knight f5. So black remains under pressure with the weak pawn on a6, the weak pawn on e5. That's why black usually plays bishop e6 first, knight c4, queen e7. We saw this also from the other version. C3 is a bit of a different version now, because black doesn't want to play rook d8, but will play rook b8, putting some pressure on our bishop on b3. And that's why bishop e3, like in the other position.
Yeah.
And here we have mirror variations. If rook d8, take on c5, queen c5, knight cd2,
Yeah.
bishop b3, knight b3, and the same story.
Yeah.
Black's queen is nowhere good to go. After bishop e3, black can also play rook b8.
It's actually only the same stuff with the inclusion of h6 and h3.
Doesn't change so much. It
Yeah.
changes in some details. After take, knight d2, we still play the same moves. Bishop b3,
Pawn takes.
pawn takes again. Knight a5, rook c1. And both in case of this, white is better. Or after rook c1, queen b6, knight e5. Here it's maybe a slightly better version for black to include these pawns, but it doesn't change a whole lot. Rook e8, knight c4, take. Our structure is better. After queen c5, knight e3. Or if the queen goes somewhere else, we can play f3. We can also consider e5, but f3, just to keep the structure intact, looks very good.
Yeah. Just let me mark 3 pawn weaknesses.
3 very clear weaknesses, yeah.
Yeah.
All other things being equal, white will eventually exploit these weaknesses, either by dropping the knight back to d2, attacking them directly, or by, more slowly rook a5, with the idea of rook c5 or knight e5, things like that. Queen c5 similarly, knight e3, queen e5, f3.
And I remember once, in one of the other clips you mentioned that even after h3, there's no need to be afraid of playing f3, because it weakens, of course, the dark squares, but it fortifies e4, and there's no way for black to exploit it.
Yeah, no, I mean, you have to be careful, of course. Things could go wrong here. If black were to get very active, he could exploit our weaknesses. But it's a bit of a risk and reward situation. Black is also risking a lot because a6 is weak, c7 is weak. You could easily end up down a pawn or even 2 in a few moves if you play inaccurately with black. So here, objectively, if both sides play well, it'll probably be close to equality. That being said, I think that white has good chances to outplay black. And also, you get to this position, you're already knowledgeable about it, while your opponent is more likely to have come here without a great deal of knowledge, to be shorter on time, to be unsure of his position. I guess we're kind of coming into this position with our eyes wide open. We know what we're getting into, and black has, we've sort of forced him to go for this. He's had to play accurate moves, rook b8. And queen b6 here is an especially, I think, especially difficult decision, because for black it also feels natural to go for an ending like this where you think, I should be able to hold it eventually. But this is very easy for black to lose. With these pieces just completely marooned on the queen side, things could go very wrong for black. And I believe that this whole idea here to take on c5 and knight d2 is actually quite a new one. I'm not sure if it's been played before after rook d8 or rook b8, but in general, quite a rare idea and very dangerous for black.